You know, there are comeback albums, and then there's this one. If Ozzy Osbourne's career was a roller coaster, and you could say it sort of was, this was the part where the ride had completely broken down and the crowd had gone home. And then somehow someone came along and got it roaring again. And the best part, not only did this album save his career, it turned him into a solo rock god. It's one of those rare stories where a musician gets kicked out of one of the most legendary bands of all time and then somehow comes back bigger than ever. You might have guessed it by now that I'm talking about Ozzy Osbourne's first solo album, Blizzard of Ozz. And if you love rock and roll, prove it. Like this video and subscribe, and then we'll get going. So, to understand why Blizzard of Ozz mattered so much, you have to picture where Ozzy was in 1979. So, Black Sabbath had ruled the heavy metal world for a decade. They basically invented the genre entirely and had spent the decade touring, partying, and being rock and roll stars. But by the late 70s, the magic was fading. Drugs and alcohol weren't just part of the party, they were the party. And this started to cause the band's creative energy to dry up. Also, the music industry was changing. Punk rock was exploding and Sabbath suddenly looked like old-timers compared to the new sound. And Ozzy? Well, Ozzy was in a league of his own when it came to self-destruction. He once admitted that during that period, he was drinking 4 bottles of cognac a day. Now that's not really rock and roll excess. That's kind of like, how are you even still breathing?
I'm insane. I suppose it's my way of saying to people, hey, I'm here. I'm just bizarre. I always have been bizarre. I'm just like a likeable lunatic.
Eventually, Sabbath had enough. In April of 1979, they fired him. Not over a huge fight, but simply because they couldn't function anymore with him in the band. And guitarist Tony Iommi said they couldn't even rehearse properly because Ozzy was such in bad shape. Although in his book, Ozzy did dispute this being the sole reason, but I guess we'll never really know. I was no more up than the rest of them, Ozzy said. It was For Ozzy, it was devastating. Imagine being the voice of Paranoid, War Pigs and Iron Man, and then suddenly you're not just out of the band, you're out of a job and you're wondering what the hell you're going to do with the rest of your life. He certainly wasn't going to go sign on or go and work in a factory, but he was spending money that he didn't have. He may have no choice. So, naturally, he spiralled. He got £96,000 for his part in the name of Sabbath, and he holed himself up at the Le Parc Hotel in Los Angeles for weeks, surrounded by mountains of drugs and booze, barely leaving the room. He later said he honestly thought his career and maybe his life was over. But little did he know fate had other plans. Sharon Arden, the daughter of Sabbath's manager Don Arden, wasn't about to let Ozzy disappear into the abyss. You see, Sharon saw something in him that Ozzy couldn't see in himself at that point, that he was still a star. He just needed the right people around him and the right project to pull him out of his fog. So she convinced him to try go solo, which at the time was very risky. Plenty of singers had left famous bands and fallen flat on their face, like Davy Jones from the Monkees or Eric Burdon from the Animals. And Ozzy wasn't sure he could cope with that embarrassment. Ozzy, despite his bravado, was a very sensitive soul, and he couldn't cope with being a failure in front of the whole world. The pressure was too much, but I think deep down, Ozzy knew that he had to prove himself to be more than just the guy from Black Sabbath. So Sharon started helping him put a band together, and this is where the story takes a dramatic turn. So first came the search for a guitarist. They auditioned people left and right, but nothing clicked until Randy Rhoads walked in. Randy was 23, a skinny kid from California who played guitar like a hurricane. He wasn't just a metal shredder like Ozzy was looking for. He actually had a deep love of classical music, and you can hear it in his playing. His guitar solos have structure, drama and melody. Rhoads at the time was still officially a member of LA rock band Quiet Riot, so initial rehearsals with Ozzy were conducted in secrecy in LA, assisted by drummer Frankie Banali and bassist Dana Strum. So when Ozzy first heard Randy warm up on guitar, he said it was like a light bulb went off in his head. Right there, in that moment, Ozzy knew he'd found his guy. He said said this in his book I Am Ozzy. Randy looked like Mr. Cool. He was an incredibly sweet, down-to-earth guy, a real gentleman too. Not at all what you'd expect of a flash American rock and roll guitar hero. Randy said, I just turned up and did some riffs, and he said, you've got the gig. I had the weirdest feeling because I thought, didn't even hear me play yet. Then came along bassist Bob Daisley, who was a rock veteran with a knack for songwriting, and drummer Lee Kerslake, best known for his work with Uriah Heep. And together, they formed what many fans call Ozzy's greatest lineup. Daisley was initially wary at first. Ozzy had just been fired from Black Sabbath, and in his words, he didn't have a lot of credibility. But after rehearsing at Ozzy's house in Stafford, he agreed to join the new album project. That November, at Don Arden's Jet Records office in London, Daisley met the guitarist who had just arrived in from Los Angeles. Daisley went on to further praise Rhoads, saying the main riffs came from Randy, then he and I would work those riffs into songs. But Ozzy did have his input. His vocal melodies were always good and always important. Daisley also wrote, in his estimation, 98% of the lyrics, just as Black Sabbath's bassist Geezer Butler had written the words to many of Sabbath's songs. Ozzy was not a lyricist, Daisley says, but a couple of the song titles were his. To me, I don't see this as just a group of musicians, it's a real creative force now. And importantly, they're trying not to sound like Black Sabbath. They're desperate to make something new. Ozzy had the name and was the selling point of the band. It was great to work with both Ozzy and Randy, and equally enjoyable to work with Lee. The four of us had a great time in those early years making music together. So they began recording in March 1980 at Ridge Farm Studio in Surrey, England, and the sessions were electric. Chris Sangradis was brought in to produce the album, with Max Norman hired as the studio engineer. However, Osbourne and the band were dissatisfied with Chris's approach, leading to his dismissal partway through the project. Norman stepped up to handle both production and engineering duties, ultimately completing the album. But despite his significant role, Norman's production work on Blizzard of Ozz went uncredited, though he would go on to produce all of Osbourne's records up until 1986's The Ultimate Sin. Bob Daisley has said that Ozzy came in with some ideas, but wasn't overflowing with complete songs. So the band had to jam and bounce riffs around to slowly shape the album together. Randy's guitar work is the centerpiece of the record. He even triple tracked his solos to get that raw power that the record is famous for. And then there was Ozzy's voice. It's sharper and more urgent than his later Sabbath years. You can hear that he's hungry and he's desperate again. And his voice, well, in my opinion at least, sounds at his absolute best on his first two solo records. So the album came together in just 4 weeks, though by Ozzy's own admission, much of that time was spent at the Plough, the pub next door to the studio. We would lay a track down in the morning, he recalled, and the moment we'd get a track done, I'd go for a drink. If it wasn't for closing hours, the album would never have been done. During recording, Ozzy jokingly nicknamed Bob Daisley Sid Serious for his focus in the studio. But it wasn't just Ozzy indulging. It was a fun time, Daisley says. We'd all do a little bit, apart from Randy, who didn't do drugs. But Ozzy, he tended to overdo it. Watching Ozzy's self-destructive binges inspired Daisley to write the lyrics to one of the album's standout tracks, Suicide Solution. Ozzy contributed the opening line, wine is fine but whiskey's quicker, a nod to Ogden Nash's candy is dandy but liquor is quicker, and has said that it was about AC/DC frontman Bon Scott, who had just died from alcohol poisoning in February of 1980, but Daisley disagrees. Bon Scott was a mate of mine and he happened to die around about that time. But the lyrics were about Ozzy because he was always getting on it. At that point, Ozzy conceded I was going the same way as Bon Scott. When the album was recorded, the group was billed as the Blizzard of Ozz, and the band expected the credit to reflect that. However, when the album was released, Ozzy Osbourne appeared in much larger letters, making it seem like it was a solo record. Bassist Bob Daisley later claimed that this was a deliberate move by Sharon to minimise the credit given to Daisley, Randy and Lee, despite their major songwriting contributions. Both Daisley and Kerslake recalled that Rhoads was unhappy about the change and even considered leaving the band in late 1981. Producer Max Norman has stated that Bob and Lee's input was significant. although the Osbourne camp might dispute that today. So I just want to rattle through some of the songs on the record that just to sort of summarise them and some of my thoughts on them. So Crazy Train, the album's lead single, that iconic riff is instantly recognisable. Doesn't it make you think of Kevin from The Office?
Please give a big hand to Mr. Kevin Malone.
The lyrics, which are written by Daisley, are actually about the Cold War and the general madness of the world. But I think Ozzy delivers them in a way that has just so much energy, it feels like it's his own personal battle cry. And on finding the name of the song, Daisley said, "I've always been a train buff, and so has Randy." So I said to Randy about one of his riffs, "Randy, that sounds like a train, but it sounds nuts." And he said, "Yeah, a crazy train." Mr. Crowley was inspired by Aleister Crowley, the infamous occultist. So Randy's organ intro is like gothic drama, and his solo is superb. Goodbye to Romance, maybe my favourite song on the album. This is Ozzy's bittersweet farewell to Sabbath. It's almost a ballad, showing a softer side that surprised fans. Suicide Solution, often misunderstood as promoting suicide, when in fact it was warning about the dangers of alcohol abuse. The solution in the title is literally alcohol, the liquid that was killing Ozzy at the time. If I'm being honest, I think there's going to have to be a full-length video on this one because it stirred up quite a bit of controversy. So more on that in another video in the future. And Revelation, Mother Earth. This is Randy at his most ambitious, weaving classical-inspired guitar lines with apocalyptic lyrics about humanity's destruction of our planet. When Blizzard of Ozz was released in September 1980 in the UK and March 1981 in the US, it was a smash hit. The critics were mixed at first, but they always had been. They'd never really been fond of Sabbath, so what were they ever going to make of a solo Ozzy album? Some still saw Ozzy Osbourne as a washed-up ex-Black Sabbath singer, and the album's over-the-top style was a bit too much for certain rock journalists. But for fans, the people who actually matter, well, they went nuts for it. In the US, it took a little bit of time before it went quadruple platinum. And this is where the story about the dove comes in. You might have heard it before. Well, they needed success in America badly because Ozzy was broke, so they had a meeting with record label CBS to celebrate the signing of him to their label, and Sharon had urged Ozzy to bring doves as like a peace offering. So now I just want to read you this section from his book because I don't think I can summarise it any better than he did. The meeting was a bunch of fake smiles and limp handshakes. Then someone told me how excited they were that Adam Ant was coming to America. Adam Ant? I almost chinned the when he said that. It was obvious none of them gave Even the PR chick kept looking at her watch. But the meeting went on while all the suits with gold watches spouted meaningless corporate marketing until eventually I got off waiting for Sharon to give me the cue to throw the doves in the air. In the end, I just got up, walked across the room, sat on the arm of the PR chick's chair and pulled one of them out of my pocket. "Oh, cute," she said, giving me another fake smile. Then she looked at her watch again. That's it, I thought. I opened my mouth wide. Across the room, I saw Sharon flinch. Then I went chomp, spit. The dove's head landed on the PR chick's lap in a splatter of blood. To be honest with you, I was so it just tasted of whiskey. Well, whiskey and feathers. And a bit of beak. Then I threw the carcass on the table and watched it twitch. The bird had itself when I bit into its neck, and the stuff had gone everywhere. The PR chick's dress was flecked with this horrible, nasty brown and white goo, and my jacket, a horrible yellow 80s thing with a Rupert the Bear style pattern on it, was pretty much ruined. To this day, I have no idea what was going on in my head. I mean, the poor dove. But I'll tell you one thing, it made an impression, alright. For a split second, all you could hear was everyone taking a breath at the same moment and the photographer in the corner going click, click, click. Then pandemonium. The PR chick started screaming, "Ew, ew, ew," while the bloke in a suit ran over to the bin in the corner and puked. Then alarms started going off as someone yelled into the intercom for security, "Get this animal out of here, now." At that moment, I took the other dove out of my pocket. "Hello, birdie," I said to it, giving it a kiss on the head. "My name's Ozzy Osbourne, and I'm here to promote my new album, Blizzard of Ozz." Then I opened my mouth and everyone in the room went, "No." People were covering their eyes with their arms and screaming at me to stop it and get the out. But instead of biting its head off, I let it go and it flapped happily around the room. Peace, I said, as two massive security guards burst into the room, grabbed me by the arms and dragged me out backwards. Yeah, so the meeting was a disaster, but the PR and the media generated from that meeting helped propel Ozzy back into the tabloids. You see, Sharon knew how to use Ozzy in order for him to reach crazy new heights. And eventually the album was a huge success in America. Crazy Train became a radio rock staple and remains still today one of the most licensed guitar riffs in history. And most importantly, Ozzy is no longer now the ex-Black Sabbath singer. He was Ozzy Osbourne, solo superstar. But on the eve of the sellout tour, Sharon Arden, now officially Ozzy's manager, sat in on rehearsals and something didn't feel right. I wasn't responsible for bringing Daisley and Kerslake in, she later said, and I didn't like what I saw. Not that they weren't good musicians, but visually it was all off. To Sharon, Daisley at 30 and Kerslake at 33 looked too old school for the image that she wanted. Daisley remembers Ozzy and Sharon saying more than once, "Let's get rid of Lee." They already had a replacement in mind, Mississippi-born Tommy Aldridge. "I would never agree to it," Daisley insisted. "Tommy's a great drummer, but Lee's perfect for the band." But on October 31st, 1980, the night that the UK tour wrapped at Brighton Dome, Aldridge was there as Sharon's guest. At the time, Kerslake didn't think much of it, but looking back, he admitted, "I should have twigged what was happening." A few months later, Lee Kerslake called his wife at their villa in Lanzarote. He was about to fly out for a quick break before the next leg of their tour, but his wife told him to sit down. "You're out," she said. "Ozzy's got rid of you and Bob. You're not going to America." For Kerslake, it was one hell of a bombshell. But Ozzy and Sharon have their own version of why Kerslake and Daisley were fired. "I had some great times with Lee and Bob," Ozzy said. "We were a team. But when the success came, they were like, my idea's better than your idea. And I thought, this can't work." Sharon as well compared them to union shop stewards, always fighting over money. "Lee and Bob were too small time for us," she said. "They'd take the food home from the dressing room in Tupperware boxes so that they wouldn't have to buy themselves dinner. They were a big pain in the ass."
What happened to Lee Kerslake? Because Lee Kerslake was with Heat for years.
With my desire was always to play with Tommy Aldridge as a drummer from Black Oak, Arkansas days.
I'm with you.
Right? Tommy's the greatest drummer in the world as far as I'm concerned. Even you can't beat him. And I had to get something out. After leaving Sabbath, I had to get something out really quick. So I auditioned and I auditioned and I auditioned. And you know, the first thing that puts me off people is when they come along and the first thing they ask is, "How much dough is in it for me?" And you'd be surprised how many musicians, that's all I think about is the pounds, shillings and pennies.
So they're not dedicated to the cause.
Right, but Lee's a sweetheart, a lovely. Lee was the only guy of the whole bunch that didn't. He says, "Come on, let's have a rock and roll." But I still had this thing in my mind about Tommy Aldridge. But he was still with Pat Travers.
Yeah.
And then I didn't leave Lee on bad terms. Well, he may have got a bit cheesed off about the deal, but I had my thing in what I wanted to do in life. You know, I had my goal, if you like. Lee's the sweetest man I've ever met in my life.
What's he doing now?
I think he's back with Uriah Heep.
Oh, he's back with Heap, is he? Oh, dear.
They've just done an album. I wish him all the luck. Lee's the sweetest man I've ever met in my life. He's a gentleman.
A nice guy.
He's a gentleman. He's a real nice guy.
Because I used to follow Heap in the early days, of course, right round the circuit.
Daisley called the accusations ridiculous. He believes that they were fired for standing up to Sharon, and he recalls her telling Ozzy that some US promoters wanted to book 2 shows in one day. Ozzy said to us, "Fellas, you've got to back me up. My voice won't handle it." So we told Sharon, "Look, Ozzy's voice isn't going to hold out." Then Sharon blamed us. She said we refused to do 2 shows a day. It was absolute. We were backing up Ozzy because he asked us to. Naturally, both men felt betrayed. Kerslake says that after they were fired, Randy Rhoads threatened to quit in protest. Randy said to me, "I'll leave if you want me to. I don't want to stay in this without you two." That's how close we all were. I told him, "Randy, this is going to go through the roof. These 2 albums are going to sell millions. Trust me. Stay with it, mate, and good luck to you. I wish I hadn't said that now. He'd still be alive. More on that in another video. Anyway, despite the interpersonal band problems, without Blizzard of Ozz, it's very possible Ozzy's career would have ended in 1979. This album didn't just bring him back into the spotlight, it redefined him as a true rock legend. Not just as a sideshow act fronting Tony Iommi's dominating riffs. In Sabbath, Ozzy had been part of a collective, but here he was the face of the music. The album's energy, Randy's guitar wizardry, and Sharon's behind the scenes drive created a perfect storm. It proved that Ozzy could thrive creatively outside of Black Sabbath, and it also gave him the momentum to follow up with Diary of a Madman just a year later, solidifying his status as a rock legend. Looking back, Blizzard of Ozz is more than just a comeback album. It's actually really a blueprint for how rock stars can invent themselves. As long as you surround yourself with the right people, take creative risks, and don't try to recreate your old band, create something new, then you're bound to succeed. It's one of the albums that bridge classic 70s metal and the more technical 80s metal sound. Without it, the path for bands like Metallica, Megadeth, Pantera might have looked very different. So, yeah. When people say Blizzard of Ozz saved Ozzy's career, they're not exaggerating. It was the jolt of life he needed. The record that turned him from a casualty of the 70s into one of the defining voices of the 80s. It's proof that even when you're at rock bottom, there's still a chance that you can come back swinging. And look, I know, if your comeback happens to involve one of the greatest guitarists of all time and a riff like Crazy Train, well, that's how legends are made. Thanks for watching, all you rock and rollers. As always, don't forget to drop a like on this video if you're into rock and roll. We seem to be a dying breed at the moment. There isn't many of us left. So let's all stick together, you know what I mean. Drop your thoughts on the album in the comments below. And most importantly, what's your favourite song from the album? I'll kickstart the discussion. Mine is Goodbye to Romance. Again, don't forget to like and subscribe. It's a #1 way for me to grow my channel. And I will see you in the next one.